kids develop a cognitive understanding of no and of yes well before they are able to kind of stop their little motors from running. So even though they do understand in their head what you mean when you say no, they can't stop. They're like a bundle of impulses. And so it's really important to continue your physical intervention of getting up and removing them for a long time after they know what no means. Parenting is really a challenging process, and the reason it's not easy is that our children evoke very strong feelings in us. And so sometimes it's difficult to get our brains to get going before our feelings take over. We get so angry and we feel so frustrated and depleted and exhausted that sometimes we lose sight of what the goals are, and in the moment what we really want is for them to suffer for what they did. You know, usually we've been way too patient and way too nice, and not only did they not appreciate how patient we were, but they're also not doing what we asked them to do. My big thing with parents is to encourage them to be reflective and to be thoughtful and to look at parenting as a mutual process, so that when you're talking about what am I going to do about this kid's behavior, you're also thinking about, well, what did I do just before that happened, and how have I been responding to that behavior? Because it's really a two-part deal. Parents need to develop an approach to discipline that comes out of a philosophy and thinking about what they're doing as parents. I want parents to understand that kids' behavior is a result of mutual interaction between the two of them. And if they do some thinking and some reflecting and make some plans, they're going to reduce the number of times they need to have a consequence or a punishment for their young child. So let's talk about some strategies that help avoid having to use discipline techniques. And my personal favorite, I would have to say, is planning ahead for success rather than reacting to failure. That's a really big one. It's the ounce of prevention theory. Sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking of the usual negative behaviors that kids will exhibit. I don't want you climbing on the furniture. I don't want you running out the door. I don't want you hitting other children. And so you've given them a whole recipe of potential difficult behaviors that they could exhibit that they may have forgotten about. So you don't want to remind them. You want to think about those, and you want to turn that into the positive of that. I'd like to see nice hands. I'd like you to sit in the chair. I would like you to stay close to mom. So you think of the positive version of what you're hoping to see, and then you build in what positive thing will happen afterwards when that occurs. Another important thing for parents to understand, and I present this in a humorous way, is that it's a child's job to challenge us. And it's really critical for us to remember that that's their job. They're doing their job. Kids' job is to figure out how far is their world. You know, what are their limits? How far can they push? How far can they go? But it's our job to provide them with very clear boundaries and lines around the box so that they know that there is a place beyond which they can't go. You don't need to be the perfect parent. You don't need to never yell. You don't need to never make mistakes. You just need to be willing to think about what you're doing and to make some plans and to have some consistent interventions. And when you do that, there's always the opportunity that you can go back and apologize and do it better the next time. And in that way, you're really helping your child model, you're helping your child learn, you're helping your child become the person that you want them to be by your being the person that you want to be. The top things that I would like parents to take away from this presentation are that they need to think about what they're doing as parents and be reflective. That they need to have an approach to discipline that is reasonable and has reasonable age-appropriate expectations. That they need to be consistent with the consequences that they choose, and that they need to be willing to make plans and think ahead of time about how they're going to deal with certain situations so that they avoid having to come up with 110 ways to punish their preschooler. Use the word plan. I just love making plans with kids. It's really a good thing, and it helps them to think that they have to think ahead, that you're thinking ahead, that you can make plans. I started out my career working with emotionally disturbed preschoolers in a therapeutic nursery school kindergarten program. And I'll never forget, there was this young child who's probably now in his 30s, but he was having a lot of problems, very impulsive, and he used to have to get removed from the group sometimes, especially during circle time, because he just would literally fall apart. And one day that had happened, and we called in our resource teacher to come and remove him. That was the plan. And he picked him up, and the kid is screaming and saying, "I don't like the plan! I don't like the plan!" So, and it was okay. He didn't like the plan, but he knew there was a plan. And that's very important. They don't have to like the plan, but it's really comforting at some deep level to know that there is a plan. Always validate a child's feelings or their impulses. It's okay for them to feel however they feel. That's why it's really a mistake to say, "Do you want to get your coat on now?" Or, "Are you ready to brush your teeth now?" Not really. You know, who wants to leave? They're having a good time. You're the one that's got to get home and make dinner. It's not in their best interest to get their coat on. They're having fun. So don't ask in that way. You know, it's really time to leave now. We need to get coats on. Or it's time to brush teeth, and right after that we can have stories. So it's okay for them to feel the way they feel. Validate the feelings, even though the behaviors might be okay. So it's really okay that you're angry that Mommy was on the phone, but it's not okay to grab the phone out of my hand. You know, the other thing that we're not supposed to do is ever make a child feel that we don't love them. So sometimes a parent will say, "I love you very much, but right now I don't like what you did." Well, I don't think a child feels very loved in the moment if that's your tone of voice. You know, what they hear is your feeling, and your feeling is you're angry. So they don't feel loved, and it doesn't matter if you put a disclaimer on. In the moment when you're angry at them, they feel your anger, not your love. So sometimes we can make ourselves crazy with these sort of semantic things, and I feel that bribery is the same thing. The problem is that if we become beggars, "If you will please not hit your sister, I'll get you the biggest toy at Toys R Us." We don't want to do that. We want to be very confident about the fact that they can use good hands with their sister, and you know they're really working on that. So if they're able to use good hands with their sister, then you're going to be able to do blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't mean that every time they exhibit a nice behavior, you have to get them something, you have to go to Toys R Us. That is not what I'm suggesting at all. Often what I would suggest to use as a reinforcement, and I'm looking at this more as sort of behavioral psychology and reinforcement techniques, I'm thinking about time spent with you, something they like to do with you, a favorite game, an extra story. You know, it's very rarely is it going to be a toy at Toys R Us. It's really important to have an opportunity for parents to ask specific questions at the end of a presentation, because most parents come to a presentation like this with specific issues or challenges that they're dealing with their own kids. And they come hoping that the presenter is going to address their concerns. So I always want to provide the opportunity for parents to ask a very specific question, and for me to be able to address it very specifically and give them an answer that might be particularly helpful for their situation.